So in this video, I'm going to be connecting reincarnation and math. But before I explain it, just keep in mind two things. First, this is all just a theory. And second, I'm 16. I don't actually know shit. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get right into this. So to understand this, you have to understand the first 4 dimensions and how they actually work. So for the first dimension, I'm actually going to use a graph to explain this. So the easiest way to understand this is to imagine that the first dimension is x. And x is every possible outcome on a horizontal line on the graph. The only difference in the real world is that that graph doesn't just go up to 10. It's actually infinite. Okay, so to explain the second dimension, I'm also going to be using a fucking graph. Only this time, the second dimension is the vertical line on the graph. Don't confuse the word vertical with the word height. I know that sounds fucking stupid, but it'll make sense in a minute. So the second dimension is just x, but it's kind of perpendicular, I guess, or it's rotated 90 degrees from where x originally was, if that makes sense. And the second dimension isn't actually called x. That was just an analogy. The second dimension is called y. So the graph is actually 2-dimensional if you take both fucking dimensions of the graph and then you like plot a point on it. So if you do a point like -7x and +4y, that would be a 2-dimensional point. And the entire graph is 2-dimensional because every possible point is either on the x-axis or on the y-axis or in between both of them, if that makes sense. For the third dimension, I'm gonna be using a graph, or I don't even know if this is a fucking graph, bro, but fuck it, it's a graph. Okay, so from this perspective, green would be y, red would be x, and then blue would be z. Or in other words, the first dimension is red, the second dimension is green, and then the third dimension is blue. This is why I said earlier in the video, don't confuse the word vertical with the word height, because those are 2 different dimensions. The depth and height are actually the same thing. We just label it because it's about perspective. So like, since there is no up, down, left, right in the universe, it's kind of just space. That means depth and height are actually the same thing. We just label them as different because we perceive shit. Like, I mean, you'd kind of have to describe something, you'd have to have those 2 be different words, if that makes sense. So the fourth dimension is just time, or space-time. I say or space-time because we don't actually know whether or not time can exist without space, because the formula for speed is just distance divided by time. You can reverse engineer the formula for speed to get a formula for time, but I just don't know how to fucking do it because I'm stupid. Wait, I lied. I just looked that shit up. So the formula for time is distance divided by speed. You don't know if the fourth dimension is space-time or just time because the formula implies that time can't exist without space in motion, or at least empty space in motion. Time also isn't linear, and it also doesn't progress at the same rate for everyone else, but I'm nowhere near smart enough to explain that shit. So you'd have to go look up special relativity and general relativity. That's some shit Einstein created. It's still theory though. So the fifth dimension, we actually have no fucking idea what it is. So I'm gonna just tell you what I think it is. So I think the fifth dimension is just a location in space for consciousness to exist. I say this because we can't really locate consciousness on like the body, like even in the brain. Like we can locate which parts of the brain are responsible for personality, but we don't know exactly what makes you you. Like, we can't point out exactly where in the body consciousness is. We also can't point out where consciousness is in any other form of life. So one day I was just thinking like, well, if we haven't figured out where the hell consciousness is after all this time, it's probably just in a higher dimension. And since we can only perceive the first 4 dimensions with our brains and our bodies and shit, that kind of makes sense. So I think that perception of any kind, or except for fucking cameras, but perception of any kind creates a place in the 5th dimension for consciousness to enter. So to give you an analogy so you can like understand what I'm saying, imagine that consciousness is just a pure form of energy and it behaves like a wave function. And whatever tool you use to perceive reality, like our brain and our eyes and whatnot, that behaves as a antenna for the wave function to connect to, if that makes sense. And you can apply the same logic to all other life forms, but some of them use different tools to perceive reality. So it's just the same shit, but with different perception. So I think that when we die, we just go back into the 5th dimension, and then we either turn into everybody else or we just go into a unoccupied point of perception, and then that's how we become conscious. I think that's what you would call reincarnation, because with the laws of the universe, I mean, energy can't be created or destroyed, so that makes sense. But that's it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to like, dislike, I don't really care.
Oh yeah, ay, they wanna go to war with me, wanna even scroll with me. I'm in that big body, this not a G. Smoking your meds, put them in a leaf. Got too much on me, know how I be. Don't need that bitch, took her on the spree. Loving my bitch, hitting on the beach. I'm with the floss, scooting down the street. I'm in the city, 50 on me. I got 150s on me. Walk in the store, get whatever I need. Fuck in the face, got her on her knees.